It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by CartKing.com. You go to www.cart-king.com or give them a call at 877-986-7771. Tell them Ed Opperman sent you, get a good deal. Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Perhaps your current business wants to add multiple point-of-sale locations across the country quickly. Maybe the facility you manage could kickstart revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services. Well, CartKing.com could be the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail, coffee, and food carts and kiosks that money can buy. For 20 years, CartKing.com has been working with clients and corporations across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application, from large, heated, and secure outdoor retail or food kiosks to smaller, more mobile coffee carts, kiosks in the indoors. And they design and build them all. You go to the website, you check out the designs, they help you design it, they build it for you, they ship it worldwide. Tell them Ed Opperman sent you, 877-986-7771. You can find me at emailrevealer.com, get an autographed copy of my book, and whatever kind of PI services you might need. Okay, I'm really excited about today's show because I just realized when I was doing some more research on our guest here, Gary Lachman, that people have been asking me to book this guest for a while. His latest book is Dark Star Rising, Magick and Power in the Age of Trump. He's got an appearance coming up September 5th. He's going to be talking about Crowley because he wrote another book about Crowley, too. That's very well known, very well received, too. What is this here? Aleister Crowley, Magic, Rock and Roll, and the Wickedest Man in the World. So September 5th is going to be at the Century Club in Soho. The website, let me pull this up real fast. I'm all over the place here. The website is in his bio here. Where are we? Kind of getting old. Okay, here it is. Come on. Gary, what's your website?
It's just www.garylachman.co.uk.
See how easy that was?
And just to clarify, it's Soho in London, not in New York. I haven't broken into Manhattan as a speaker yet.
Oh, okay, but now that's fascinating because first, before we get started, tell us about yourself. Who is Gary Lachman?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been working on that one for a while. I'm the author of quite a few books about the consciousness culture and the Western esoteric tradition. And the Western esoteric tradition is the sort of magical counterculture of the West, with Hermeticism and Gnosticism and Kabbalah and a variety of other ancient philosophies. And I've also in a past life was a musician. I was in a band called Blondie some years ago, quite a few, back in the 70s and early 80s, and I also played with a few other people. And for my sins in that world, I was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame some years back. But most recently, as you said, I've published a book called Dark Star Rising, Magick and Power in the Age of Trump, which is about a kind of resurgence of occult politics in the postmodern world today.
Now, you're originally from Bayonne, New Jersey, and then you were with the band Blondie, right? Now, did your interest in these topics, the esoteric, the occult, did that predate Blondie or after?
It happened pretty much around the same time. I grew up in Bayonne, New Jersey. It's pretty much just across the river from Manhattan, so New York was always very close. And I had started hanging out sort of on the New York scene in the 74, mid-70s, just sort of on the cusp between, I guess, what was called glitter and then punk. Well, it wasn't called punk yet, but I wound up playing with Blondie because another fellow from Bayonne, New Jersey, their drummer, Clem Burke, I knew him from high school. We went to high school together, and he had been playing with bands, and I wasn't really a musician. I just was sort of somebody who sort of hung out, but I read a lot and I wrote poetry, and I was just kind of this weird kid who was into all these strange things, and he answered an ad in the Village Voice, and it turned out to be Debbie Harry and Chris Stein, who were trying to put a band together that would eventually become Blondie, and he started playing with them, and I started hanging out, and then their bass player quit to join a group called Television. That was a big band at the time, or soon to be one of the big bands on the scene. And basically, they asked me to audition, and I did, and they wound up playing bass in Blondie up until about 1977. Then I had my own band for a while, and I played with Iggy Pop in 1981. And then I retired at the sort of hoary age of 26 and dropped out of music and went on a very different path after that.
It's amazing. It's such a small world, because like we said off the air, I grew up in Staten Island. At first the Bronx first, then Staten Island. But my teenage years, those years you're talking about, 76 to 81, 82, I was down Bleecker Street. I lived with the Yippies on 9 Bleecker Street and over at Studio 10 at 10 Bleecker Street. Hung out Washington Square Park every day. I've been to CBGBs all over. We probably sat next to each other on the subway.
You probably saw me on the stage.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
That's the time I was playing, and then there was other places, of course, Max's, and so I lived in different parts of the city. I guess I said I started going over to New York. You say Staten Island. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is when we were the drinking age was 18 in New York State, and you could hitch over the Bayonne Bridge and get over to Staten Island. Everybody went to, I think it was called North Beach. Or
South Beach.
North Beach or South Beach. It was some sort of beach area, and it was usually, on a Friday, Saturday night, just jammed with, feckless teenagers out there drinking, and I was one of them,
Well, so was I.
that was kind of the background. Yeah.
And in those days, too, even though the drinking age was 18, you can go into the bars at 16, because we used to go to bars at 16. Everybody had a mustache and a beard back in those days. I don't know what's happening.
There you go, yeah. Yeah. Well, it was walking on the wild side, and then it just, used to go over to New York all the time on the PATH trains, I think it's even easier to get there now, they extended the kind of transportation.
Yeah, but then again, with the traffic and all the parking and stuff like that, I don't know about. Okay, but let's get back to the book. Okay, Dark Star Rising. Otherwise, we'll be here forever. Dark Star Rising: Magick and Power in the Age of Trump. Now, right away, a good percentage of my audience, they're going to hear the books about Trump, and they're going to say, "Well, Ed hates Trump. He's Ed's a commie and he's a liberal and a yippie. He hates Trump. So this book is full of lies." What are your politics?
I don't really talk about my politics. I mean, I'm anarcho-Platonist. I mean, I don't really, I don't really have politics, and I don't really talk about them in the book. It's not really a polemic. I mean, I don't think the book will make you like Trump any better if you don't like him to begin with. But what I'm just trying to do is kind of give a portrait of him in the context of these ideas that I'm talking about. But I mean, I try to just do kind of reportage. But I think the tone, how I write about these things and the sort of tone that I express what I'm writing in, I think that gives you an idea that I'm not necessarily in sympathy with much of the material I'm talking about. But I try to keep it cool and detached and objective, because it's fascinating. I mean, whether you like Trump or not, or you hate him or not, I think the kind of connections that I've made around him and around other people at this time that are just out in the open. There's no conspiracy theory. I know, before the show started, your sort of lead-in, was saying conspiracy theories and things of that sort. And there's not a conspiracy theory in the book aside from those that people in the book themselves are talking about. But all the stuff that I talk about in the book is just out, it's out available. And that's the thing that, for me, made it even more fascinating, because it struck me that the kind of thing I've been writing about for the last 20 years, I said, this Western esoteric or hermetic magical tradition, which has been on the fringe more or less for, the last few centuries. It's kind of woo-woo, exile land at best. But with Trump and his election and other people involved, it's suddenly become more kind of center stage. And that's one of the things that I've tried to talk about in the book. Not specifically in the sense that Trump is in the White House doing rituals or something like that, but the ideas, the sensibility, the mentality that informs a kind of magical view of things has kind of taken hold.
Okay, and you said that there's things right out in the open in plain sight that we can all see. Can you give us some examples?
Well, I'll tell you, this is how I got started writing the book. Very soon after Trump's election, I think a week after it, there was the annual meeting of the National Policy Institute, the NPI. And that's the name of a group that generally is believed to be, rather white supremacists. If not that, then certainly, very far right. And they're great, supporters of Trump. And the fellow who was the head of the NPI then was Richard Spencer. And he's also, or he was, he is, he's also the fellow who invented the alternative right, the alt-right. And at the start of this meeting, flushed with Trump's victory, he starts the meeting by saying, "Hail Trump, hail our hero. We made this happen. We dreamed this into reality. We willed him into the White House," and things to that effect. And then he talks about it as, their victory of the will. And the response to that was practically everybody in the crowd, gave Hitler salutes, or Roman ones, as Spencer later explained. And this was in all the media. And, the Hitler salute business got most of the attention. But it wasn't hidden, wasn't in some fringe website or something. It was, something that was on everything. It was on the news. It was everywhere. But among all the different reports of this, accounts of this was one that caught my attention, and this was by a fellow named Harv Bishop. And Harv Bishop is, he blogs about New Thought. New Thought is an overall name for a variety of different sort of philosophies and beliefs that center along the idea that thoughts are causative, that, through the mind alone we can make things happen. The right use of our mental powers, we can affect reality directly. And this is something that, gets repackaged in different ways, and it's been around for quite some time. And it actually has some respectable pedigree going back to people like Ralph Waldo Emerson. He coined the phrase New Thought, and William James, the great American philosopher and psychologist, and even going further back to, the ancient philosophies that I've been writing about for a long time. And but what New Thought, people involved in New Thought mostly use, this philosophy for is to better themselves in some way, either, to sort of self-improvement in some kind of way, or, more directly to better themselves financially. And this is sort of known as the prosperity gospel, which is something I might get back to further on. But what Bishop was saying in this blog that he put up, he said, well, it looks like people like Richard Spencer and his fellow travelers with the alt-right and the Trump supporters, they seem to be saying that they're using New Thought techniques to put Trump into office. And so I followed that on, and the next thing that came was that, well, Trump himself is a devotee of New Thought.
And what leads you to that conclusion? That Trump is a devotee of this New Thought?
Well, because Trump was a follower of the teachings or the philosophy of Reverend Norman Vincent Peale.
Right.
Reverend Norman Vincent Peale, in 1952, published a book called The Power of Positive Thinking, and it was an immense bestseller, so it must work. It certainly worked for him. It was, I think, on the New York Times bestseller list for about 2 years. And Peale had been around, for a while before that. He had sort of newspaper columns and radio show, and he again, he had this sort of message of, if you could use your mind in the proper way, if you think affirmatively, if you think optimistically, if you think positively, if you focus on your goals, and if you don't let things get you down or interfere or in some way dissuade you from your purpose, if you persevere enough and if you follow this kind of 3-step process that he developed, you'll succeed. That which you want to happen will indeed happen. And this book was immensely successful. And when Trump was a boy, he used to go to the sermons that Peale gave at the Marble Collegiate Church on Fifth Avenue and 29th Street in New York. And his father was a follower, and they used to go to the church to hear the sermons. And so Trump heard it as a boy, and then he himself grew up in that. And then later on in life as an adult, he had two of his weddings in the church. He called Norman Vincent Peale his mentor. And I mean, probably the highest praise I would say that he gave Peale was that he said after listening to one of his sermons, he could sit there and listen for another hour. And coming from someone who apparently doesn't have much of an attention span, that sounds like, praise indeed. And so, he said that he was Peale's greatest student. And probably the single most important thing that he learned from Peale is Peale said that facts don't matter. It's our attitude toward facts that matter. This is something that he got from the psychologist Carl Menninger. And in a way, it's a kind of reworking of an ancient belief from the Greek philosopher Epictetus, who said that it's not things that bother us, it's our thoughts about things. It's how we think about things that bother us. So if we could change how we think about things, then we can free ourselves from, being troubled by all the, troubles around us. And incidentally, strangely enough, Epictetus developed this philosophy at a time of great sort of crisis and trouble and uncertainty in Roman society. So it's kind of, in many ways, apt that something similar would be very popular these days. And the whole sort of alternative fact and post-truth atmosphere that seems to have come into place right after Trump was elected goes back to this. I think you can trace it back, or at least part of it you can trace back to this adage, this aphorism from Peale that it's not facts that matter, it's our attitude towards them. So you have, so one part of the puzzle here is you have these Trump alt-right fellow traveler supporters who have somehow used New Thought techniques to put him in office. You have Trump himself, who uses some positive thinking techniques, and he writes about them in his self-help books, The Art of the Deal and other things like that. And and then so there were a few other pieces of the puzzle that started to come into place, where suddenly it seemed that this wasn't an isolated event. And again, I don't necessarily am saying it's planned, but it seemed to be the case that not only here in the States, but also in Russia, that these kinds of ideas were having some effect. We're reaching into areas where, the powers were at work. And this is what led me to follow this whole trail and to sort of write this book, which I did in a few months, and it was happening on the ground when I wrote it. It's 2 years ago when I finished it, so some of it may seem a bit out of date, but not a great deal actually, because I think much of the sort of stuff I was writing about, the atmosphere, the whole sensibility, is still very much in place, and in fact is even getting more in place.
Yeah, and don't forget, the book we're talking about is Dark Star Rising, Magick and Power in the Age of Trump. And our guest is Gary Lachman. This might be a good time to take a little commercial break. With Gary Lachman, his website is a little complicated. It's Gary Lachman. Where is this thing here? I did it again. I should have that ready. GaryLachman.co.uk. Keep in mind, he's got an appearance coming up September 5th, talking about Crowley at the Century Club in Soho in London, not the one on the Lower East Side. Okay, he's gone now. He don't have it in New York anymore. We'll be right back with more of Gary Lachman after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. Check out CartKing.com, 877-986-7771. Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Perhaps your current business wants to add multiple point-of-sale locations across the country quickly. Maybe the facility you manage could kickstart revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services, like let's say you own an office building or a warehouse. Put one of these carts there in the lobby. Well, CartKing.com can be the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail coffee and food carts and kiosks money can buy. For 20 years, CartKing.com has been working with clients and corporations across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application. From large, heated, and secure outdoor retail or food kiosks to smaller, more mobile coffee kiosks or coffee stations, coffee carts, CartKing.com designs and builds them all. Cards and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on the website, cardking.com. Please visit today at cardking.com or just call them at 877-986-7771. Tell them Ed Opperman sent you and you get a good deal. Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You also do all the kind of different services for you. Online dating service investigations called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites, and all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. The Opperman Report is brought to you by SubhashTechnosis.com. Subash Technosis is a search engine optimization and website design company. They're located in India, so you know you're going to save a lot of money and get top quality service. They offer all sorts of business process outsourcing, data entry, banking BPO services, recruitment process outsourcing, software testing, offshoring, research network, customer care, press release, content writing and distribution, and much, much more. Now, you can get a hold of Subash Technosis by email at info@subhashtechnosis.com. Their website is www.subhashtechnosis.com, and their Skype is ANUSHASUBASH. Okay, welcome back. We're here with Gary Lachman, but formerly from the band Blondie. God bless him. I was a big fan of that band. And also Iggy Pop, too. It's another one. All that stuff. I love that. We were just talking off the air about Bleecker Street and Bowery and Bleecker down there where CBGB's was and stuff. September 5th, he's been talking about Crowley down at the Century Club in Soho in London, which is probably the real Century Club, the real Soho. The book is called, we're talking about today, but he's got a dozen books all around the same kind of topics. Dark Star, Rising, Magick and Power in the Age of Trump. Let me ask you a question. Now, you talk about how Trump was so fascinated with this Norman Vincent Peale. A couple of questions for you. One is how come he doesn't talk about, when they were questioning him about his faith, when he came up with that wacky 2 Corinthians stuff, okay? And they were asking, and all this stuff, but they asked him about his faith. He doesn't talk about Vincent Peale today. How come?
I think Trump, again, I'm no expert on Trump, but I think he just doesn't talk about what he doesn't want to talk about. He stonewalls, you can see, he stonewalls everything. So I'm not surprised if he doesn't really want to talk about it, because I would say, just being backseat psychologist, it's probably something that's important to him. It is something that's important to him, and he probably doesn't want to get, any kind of pressure from anywhere about that, I would say. One of the things I speculate in the book about him is that I think he fits this category that a British writer named Colin Wilson, whose work I'm a great admirer of, and I've written a book about. He had this idea of what he called the right man. And the right man is a psychological profile of someone, and it can be right women too, who will never under any circumstances admit to being wrong. Will never basically say they're sorry, will never admit that they made a mistake, will never sort of, and they will just insist, and they will go to the greatest lengths whatsoever to, avoid in any way having to admit that they were wrong. And in many cases, it can turn into violence if they're really sort of pursued by this and all that. And there's a kind of, you get this in Trump. I say in the book, I quote him in a couple places where he says, basically says that he never apologizes. And then he said somewhere, I forget, to some talk show host, where he said, well, yes, I'll apologize sometime in the future if I'm ever wrong. Something
right.
along those lines.
Right.
And this is a kind of bravado and a kind of, boastful self-confidence. But I also think this is a kind of real mental practice that's associated with this positive thinking sort of thing. Again, he's generally upbeat, even though he's very negative about people he doesn't like, and says lots of incredibly negative sorts of things. When you think about the things he gets away with, it's remarkable that he does, and he does because of his chutzpah. He does because he just does it. And he's been just doing it for the longest time. If you read about his life and all that, I mean, it goes back a long time. I mean, I first heard of him, again, we're talking about old New York. I first heard of him back in the, in the mid '70s when he was appearing on with the Post and the Red Tops and all of that kind of stuff. At the same time when I was down in downtown New York, and he was hanging out in Studio 54 and all that kind of thing. So,
right.
This kind of attitude, this sort of what do you want to call it? Sort of infallibility and forward thinking all the time has been going on for a long time. So I mean, I'm not surprised that he wouldn't want to talk about this, because it's the kind of thing that, I mean, if you read. There's a woman named Barbara Ehrenreich, and she's written a lot about how horrible New Thought is, and how it ruins people's lives and messes them up, and how it's all a complete kind of self-delusion and so on and so on. So I mean, most so-called rational people will be very skeptical about it, and they consider people that are interested in this sort of thing or pursue it feeble-minded. So I can assume that he would not want to sort of have to parry anybody, talking about this kind of thing, because he doesn't do that. He just states, he just says how it is. It's this or that, this or that. It's just, that's all, and that's what he has to do, I would say, in order to maintain this kind of. Well, I said he's a demagogue, and I say in the book, the demagogue, the guru, the magician, they're on a gradient. In many ways, they're doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing for a number of people. The magician, it might be one person. The guru might be whatever the cult is, and then the demagogue, it's larger, it's national. But in many ways, they're doing the same thing. They're creating an effect. They're creating a kind of atmosphere around them, creating a reality around them, and it all depends on constantly affirming the fundamental things. And I would think this is one thing that Trump is just going to do. He's not going to discuss something, especially not something like this that's fundamental, I would say, for his whole worldview.
Yeah, he would want to keep it hidden, right? Keep it to himself. What about now? It seems like others too, like Oprah and Arnold Schwarzenegger, have that same exact. They're clued into that too as well. They keep everything positive. You can't get a negative word into Arnold Schwarzenegger. He'll just take it and say, "Oh, this is so perfect. Oh, it's so exciting. Isn't that great?" You can tell him his house is on fire. Isn't that the greatest thing? Right. So, well,
I mean, it's something that's I said, the New Thought itself is not just positive thinking. It's not just Trump. I mean, it's been around, and many people. It's at the basis of a great deal of self-help and
right.
self-development and kind of personal therapy. So, I mean, as I say, there's good. Put it simply, there's good aspects to it. Even though obviously there's also negative aspects to it too. It's getting, at least in my book, it gets particular attention because of Trump being someone who's involved in it. I mean, I gave a talk recently in London here at Watkins, which is one of the oldest sort of occult bookshops in London, and someone in the talk was asking about how, isn't New Thought sinister, and isn't it it's very evil? And I said, well, actually it's not evil or sinister in itself. It's just like magic in general. It's like, who's using it and for what purposes? I mean, it's powerful. And we all know, at least since the Spider-Man movies, with great power comes great responsibility. And so that's one of the things. The people that are doing the good white magic, they're aware of their responsibility, and their aims and purposes are constrained by that. But the other people that are pursuing perhaps sorcery rather than magic, in the sense that it's for their own ends, their own personal ends, well, that's where it bleeds into the areas where it's rather dubious and dark.
Okay, and we can take a look at Trump, and I would speculate that he got his this denial of he won't apologize. He refuses to apologize. It's a sign of weakness, and I would say he got that from Roy Cohen, right? Go ahead.
I mean, well, that's yeah, I'm sure, and like who else? I mean, how many other? I mean, God, I was in the music business for a long time, and that's as cutthroat as anything else. And it's always you never apologize for, and if you apologize for something, God, you're weak, you're sensitive, you're all those kinds of things. And so if you want to be successful in that way, then yeah, of course, so it's not necessarily just endemic to him or from one source, but he's taken this source and the guy's president of the United States, So it's kind of worked.
And you're also saying too at the same time I know you gotta give him that. You gotta give him that. He's pulling it off. And you know something too. There's something to this as well. Maybe there's something in this magic you can explain to me, because he's able to lie, and certain people will believe any lie he tells. Isn't there something in this black magic as well?
Well, as I said, it's sort of the demagogue. It's not. Well, the thing with Trump is, I mean, there was a fellow named Harry Frankfurt. He was a moral philosopher, I think, at Harvard. And you have to forgive me if I'm not quoting his name or giving the name correctly. But he wrote, he's an expert in bullshit. If I may. I don't know if I can say that. Can I say that on the air?
No, in the future, try not to, because we're on AM radio too.
Okay. Well, he's an expert in taurine excrement.
Okay.
How's that?
That's better.
And the difference between that and actual lying, and he's written a book about this. And the difference is where the liar knows that he's lying, he respects the truth. He's afraid that he's going to get found out because he respects the truth, and he does everything he can to cover it up and to make sure that he's not found out. But the slinger of taurine excrement doesn't care one way or the other. He doesn't care about the truth. He has contempt for the truth because it doesn't matter. What matters is the effect that he has at the time when he's slinging his stuff. And this is, you can call it that. Trump calls it, God, what does he call it? I forget. He has a name for it in there. It escaped me right now. But it's kind of enhanced hyperbole. That's his sort of circumlocution for the same sort of stuff I'm talking about. It's basically you sell, you exaggerate, you do everything to get the effect. And once you get the effect, that's all you want. It doesn't matter. And he doesn't care. You're never going to nail him on that he lied or this isn't true or you contradicted himself. Because, again, the facts don't matter. Our attitude towards the facts matter. And this is where, look, what's happening now is a lot of chickens are coming home to roost in our day. And one of them is something called postmodernism. And postmodernism is a word that's been banned. It's been, everybody uses it and it's been around for ages. And it basically means whatever happened after modernism. And it's applied to lots of different things. But today, what we experience it as on the ground is the post-truth alternative fact world. Because basically the fundamental idea of postmodernism is that there are no absolute objective truths. All truths are relative. There's no truth with a capital T. All truths are relatives. All truths are subjective. There's no standard. There's no criteria. There's no, sort of ruler objectively out somewhere in the world in reality that we can take things and measure them against. Everything is subjective and relative to the perspective of the person engaged in the pursuit of the truth at the time. And this was something that this is an effect of what I call trickle-down metaphysics. And if you just bear with me, I'm going to get a little philosophical here for a moment. And it starts in the 1880s. With the philosopher Nietzsche, the German philosopher Nietzsche. He was brilliant Philosopher. But Nietzsche saw that precisely the situation that we're in today, where there's no objective truth, we're post-truth, there's no objective fact or alternative fact. He saw that was coming. He saw that coming in 1880s, and he said in these notes that were later collected after he went insane and after his death in a book called The Will to Power, that he's talking about the history of the next 2 centuries. This is what's coming. It's on its way, and it's unavoidable. And it's what he called the advent of nihilism. Nihilism means the belief in nothing. And basically, what he's saying is that what we had hitherto believed to be true, and what we pursued through science in one way and then through religion in another, so both kind of scientific truth and a kind of spiritual, moral, ethical truth. The very pursuit of those things has led us to the recognition that those things don't exist. We were scrupulous in our pursuit and rigorous in following it. And the very pursuit and passion for truth has led us to the truth that there aren't any truths in the sense of a big one with a capital T. But at the time when Nietzsche was saying this, people weren't ready for it. And he says this in his book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, where Zarathustra is this prophet who's lived up in the mountains. He comes down to the marketplace and he's giving his message. One of them is that God is dead and this sort of, business is on its way. And nobody wants to hear him. They're not ready for his message. And he goes back. And Nietzsche said, one of his books, that I do not speak for today, nor do I speak for tomorrow. I speak for the day after tomorrow. And the way I see it, we're kind of in the day after tomorrow, because I think from the metaphysical heights, this insight into the sort of, vacancy of these notions of truth has dwindled, has trickled down. It's come down today. And at one point, maybe 50, 60 years ago, it frightened people. This is where existentialism was very worried about all this kind of stuff and trying to, face this uncertainty and meaninglessness and come up with some kind of, answer to it. But by now we don't really care anymore. It's just become kind of everyday, mother's milk for everybody. And so that's why I say, like, trickle-down metaphysics, it's reached us today. And because of that, someone like Trump and other people can take advantage of it. I mean, they're not necessarily evil because they do that. They're opportunists. But if you know anything about Trump's, history, then exactly that's what he is. And what politician isn't an opportunist? And so they're taking advantage of this situation. And, for the last 50 years, you had the best, most advanced minds in the universities in Europe and in the States, but it's shifted over to the States, basically saying this, talking about postmodernism and deconstructionism, and this whole idea that this whole edifice of Western thought, that had truth and rationality and science and logic, all of that is just, it's just, we pulled the rug out from under it, and it just doesn't work anymore. And so in one larger kind of cultural sense, it was liberating for people who felt that was restrictive, but now it's kind of reached, kind of brass tacks, and it's turned into a world where we're stymied when someone, as you say, like Trump, just lets loose all these kinds of things, and we really can't come back to him with saying, "Oh, that's not true" anymore, because he says, "Hey, what's true?"
I got to tell you, Gary Lachman, you are an incredibly brilliant man. Okay, I'm in awe. Okay, where did you learn all this? Where did you go to school? How did you get your schooling in all this?
I didn't learn this from going to school.
Okay.
I learned this from cutting school and going to libraries and reading. No, I've just read. I read forever. I mean, that's, you're talking about early days, when I was growing up in Bayonne. That's what I did. I used to cut school and go to the Bayonne Public Library and just read everything. So I've been reading everything for the longest time. But, I did go, I lived in Los Angeles for a while, sort of from the sort of early 80s until sort of the mid 90s. And I got a degree in philosophy there. And I tried to find a place for myself in the academic world, but by the time I got into sort of a graduate program at USC, the whole atmosphere there had become infected with this postmodernism and this deconstructionism, which I myself, I feel it's a debilitating influence on the mind. I think it's this kind of dark night of the soul that we have to get through, but it's going to take a while for us to get through it. But I couldn't find anywhere in there. And actually, an article I wrote about Jordan Peterson some months ago, I was asked to write it by a magazine. It talked about that, because he talks about that in some of his lectures, about how this postmodernism has kind of infected higher education and it's doing all this kind of stuff. And I experienced that back in the I experienced some of that actually first in the 80s when I was in Los Angeles in sort of the late 80s, and I was doing my philosophy degree. Not in any kind of heavy sense, but just sort of the atmosphere. But by the time I went to USC and I was starting a sort of master's degree, it was very much there, and I wound up dropping out because I felt I would never get a job anywhere. Just because the atmosphere wasn't very congenial to the sorts of things that I was interested in. But I've just read, constantly for years and years and years. And I had the good fortune by the sort of early 90s to be able to sort of write book reviews and articles and slowly build up to, writing books. And that happened when I basically pulled up stakes in the States and moved to London here at the beginning of 96.
Was it your pursuit of this type of knowledge that caused you to move to London? or just personal?
Sorry?
Was it your pursuit of this? No.
Getting to London was a long story, but I mean, actually, I never answered your story, your question a long time ago, and you said, how did my interest in all this stuff begin?
Yeah.
But it began back when I was playing in Blondie. I mean, I first got interested in this stuff in '75 when I was living on the Bowery with Debbie Harry and Chris Stein, singer and the guitarist in Blondie. And in this loft space we were living in, it was like a 3-floor sort of space above this sort of restaurant supply shop, which I think is still there, strangely enough. But in any case, one of the floors was occupied by this wild, flamboyant artist guy, and he was very much into Aleister Crowley. And I didn't have any interest in any of that stuff prior to this. The only kind of occult stuff I was interested in was what I saw in movies, horror films. I was really into, like, the old Universal horror films, and I was into Weird Tales and H.P. Lovecraft and all that kind of thing. So I read that stuff, but I didn't really take any of the occult kind of seriously. But in that atmosphere, in the loft, Debbie and Chris had a kind of kitschy interest in it. They had sort of like voodoo dolls and upside down, crosses and pentagrams and stuff. It was just kind of a kitschy aesthetic. But this guy, a fellow named Benton, he was kind of serious about it. He was a very good artist too, and he used to give impromptu readings with Crowley's tarot deck, the Thoth tarot deck, which at the time was still relatively rare. And then he also did these big sort of canvas paintings of based on the tarot, the cards, the tarot trumps. I even posed for one of them. I don't know whatever happened to it. But he was reading Crowley, and just in that atmosphere, I just started to become interested in it. But the thing that really got me going on it was a book, again, by this writer, Colin Wilson, I mentioned earlier, simply called The Occult, and it was published in 1971. And it was hanging out with all this other debris from the previous generation. The kind of last dregs of the kind of hippie generation. So the books like Timothy Leary and the I Ching and Castaneda and all this kind of stuff. But amidst of that was this book, The Occult. And Wilson was actually, he's a very good writer. He was a philosopher. He wrote books about existential philosophy and psychology and literature and all that. So he took a very intellectual approach to it, but he's a very readable writer. And that's what got it for me, because he approached it from the point of view of kind of how do we understand this in terms of consciousness. And he was fundamentally interested in how we can achieve more intense forms of consciousness. And that struck me as a very good idea when I first read it. And I just kind of went for it from there. So it started as a kind of enthusiasm. I was very naive. I was 19 and just sort of into it. But by the time, let's say, I was out of music and had sort of been in and out of the academic world by the early 90s, I was, sort of approaching it in a bit more serious way, just in the sense of realizing that all this stuff has had an enormous impact on what we call, mainstream culture. I mean, we tend to see it as on the fringes, and certainly in the last, in the modern age now, where, we just think it's all completely superstition and all that. And there's historically a reason for that, which I can't go into now. But this is all the kind of thing that started to fit into place. And so I wanted to understand it in terms of not just as this weird kind of counter thing that I could go and have fun with and go back into the normal world, but how are both of these worlds, kind of together? Because they are. And again, that's what made me very excited about what was happening. And I wound up writing Dark Star because, again, I felt like, okay, all this stuff that's been on the fringe for a long time is now kind of not quite front page news, although one article was in the New York Times.
Oh, really? Can you describe that? Did they mention this? The same thing you've noticed?
I'm sorry?
They've mentioned the same thing that you've noticed here in the Trump world?
This is one of the other things that happened that led me on to doing the book was in February 2017, obviously after Trump had been elected, the New York Times ran an article about a talk that Steve Bannon, who at the time was still on Trump's bench and had the ear of the great man, 2014, Bannon had given a talk to a select group at the Vatican. It was a group called the Human Dignity Institute, and they were very conservative churchmen. And he was in L.A., and he talked to them via Skype, and they were in the Vatican. And in the midst of his usual kind of spiel about the global Tea Party movement and the need to fight Islamic fascism, he talked about Putin. And he was sort of, I admire him, but I'm also cautious and all that. But he was saying how what he liked about Putin was that he stood up for traditional values And it's just something that, part of his sort of platform was traditional values too. And in the midst of talking about Putin, he says, and he has someone around him in his kind of circle who reads Julius Evola. And Julius Evola, if you know who he is, was a 20th century esoteric philosopher who was brilliant in many ways, very controversial, but he had very far-right political views. And he tried to ingratiate himself first with Mussolini and then with Hitler. And he had some modest success with Mussolini, not so much with National Socialism. And after the war, after World War II, Evola was kind of this eminence grise, this kind of character in the background in Italian politics, and kind of like the intellectual mentor of different new far-right groups that were growing up, after the war. And he died in 1973. But he's one of these intellectuals that's part of the alternative right canon. They have a canon of the 10, whatever, the people you have to read, if you want to understand what we're about, and if you want to understand what this new far-right conservatism is about. And so it's because we're different from previous, far-right people. We're not just skinheads and, whatever, neo-Nazis. We have a kind of intellectual pedigree. And to a certain degree, that's true. But in any case, so you have, that's strange enough that you've got Steve Bannon, who, he gave the talk in 2014, but one can assume that he hasn't necessarily given up his, reading habits by 2017. So you have Steve Bannon, who's close to Trump, saying that he's an admirer of the work of this fellow Julius Evola, and Julius Evola himself used the kind of mental magic to try to affect political events in his day. He tried to influence Mussolini. He wanted to imbue Mussolini's fascists with more of the ancient Roman virtues. He didn't think the Italians are good material to work with, and he felt they needed, they needed something more to get them going. So much like Spencer and his, crew, who was supposed to have used mental science now, magic now, to have influenced political events, Evola, who's one of their heroes, did the same thing. And so, but what's even stranger is that in the context of mentioning Evola, Bannon alludes to someone, as I said, around Putin. And this is a fellow who's active, is a guy named Alexander Dugin, who's a very strange character who has a remarkable kind of CV. But he too was a reader of Evola. He too practices a kind of mental science, and he too is a devotee of something that's known as chaos magic, which we haven't touched on, and it's a kind of derivative or a variant of chaos magic. It was sort of the technique or the actual practice that the alt-right people apparently are said to have used to help Trump. So this was in the New York Times. In the New York Times, in the top head, it's like, Bannon talks to, Italian sort of esoteric whatever philosopher who, influenced fascists. I mean, what they said about Evola was kind of half right and half wrong. He didn't really have as much influence on the fascists as he would have liked, but he certainly tried.
So I guess the theory is Trump is tuned into this because he grew up with Norman Vincent Peale. So he knows the positive power of thinking. He knows that kind of stuff, self-hypnosis. You see him doing self-hypnosis and stuff, repeating things over and over, all that kind of stuff. But that you think that perhaps this more deeper occult knowledge came in through the Russians and Bannon and all this stuff, like this Pepe the Frog stuff and all that stuff, because that is this.
Well, it's all part of this strange, puzzle, or it's part of the trip down the rabbit hole. I don't, what Trump himself knows or thinks is one thing,
right?
But it's kind of an ingredient. I don't think he ever heard of postmodernism or chaos magic of any of this kind of stuff, but he certainly is a devotee of positive thinking. And the other thing I say in the book is that, what's the one word you would associate with Trump's administration? And the word that comes to my mind is chaos.
Right.
I mean, and if you know his how he operates. He said himself, I like to keep things uncertain. I like to keep everybody on their toes. I don't tell everybody what I'm doing. I make decisions at the last moment. I like to change things all the time. I like to keep it free and easy. And he adopts different things and changes and, all that kind of thing in a certain sense. So that's kind of something he does as an MO. And that's served him, I guess, well enough in his previous career on real estate and all that, and wheeling and dealing and all that kind of thing. But as I look more into that, it struck me, and it struck other people at the same time, like I said, around the early days of his administration and all that, was that he seemed to be doing, in a natural kind of way, what is kind of called chaos magic. So in the book, I sort of parallel, and in this way, I'm not in any way saying that chaos magicians, they're very nice people. I've met some of them, and I know some of them, are in any way supportive of this, and I don't mean to stigmatize them in any way, but it just struck me, and as I say, at the time, other people I was in corresponding with on the net, they were sort of saying the same thing, that he seemed to be doing this kind of thing naturally. And the more I looked into sort of, okay, well, what's chaos magic about? The more I looked into it, there were a great many parallels between it and positive thinking, a new thought. I spelled them out in the book. So in some ways, they're fundamentally doing the same thing. Very different, from the thing they're both doing, the center of it, they radiate out in different ways. But when you get down to it, they both want to make things happen. They're both very results driven. They both have similar sort of techniques and practices. And they both have very similar phraseology. I mean, one of the interesting things about all this stuff is that the kinds of things you want to make happen, they more or less have to be things that you could make happen naturally. You could make happen in some normal way. But for some reason, something's in your way. So in many ways, it's like you can use magic, but don't expect a miracle. You can't expect something completely off the wall or, absolutely improbable to happen. But something that could be in the realm of what in chaos magic is called an achievable reality, and in positive thinking is called a realizable wish. Something in the realm of that, you can use these practices and techniques in order to bring that about. Chaos magic, they talk about nudging. You give a little nudge to reality. You sort of push it in some way, and it kind of sets things in motion. And you've paid attention to the landscape. You paid attention to how things are connected in this particular situation that you want to affect. And you can see that if you just did that a little bit, that might lead to that, and that might lead to that. And that's very much along the same lines of what's happening with sort of positive thinking and things of that sort. So again, I don't want to stigmatize these people. I'm not saying they're responsible for this in any way. But I think if you look at it, as I did, you can see these connections. And that's what interests me, that there's these resonances and these sort of similarities operating in the background. And to get on to Pepe, I mean, Pepe the Frog, poor Pepe. Okay. Pepe the Frog is a creation of the cartoonist Matt Fury. And in some interviews I've been saying I think he's probably Matt Furious by now because his, very innocuous creation was hijacked by, the alt-right and became this kind of mascot for them. And if you don't know about Pepe was, this kind of slacker frog who started out in this kind of cartoon. And he first appeared, he's taking a leak somewhere in public. And, another character walks by and says, why are you doing that, man? He says, it feels good, man. And this became a kind of meme, on the internet. And, Richard Dawkins, among other things, he's contributed to contemporary consciousness, this idea of memes. And memes are a kind of cultural gene. It's the equivalent of a kind of gene, but in culture. And what is it? It's basically anything that people pick up and copy and disseminate and spread. And so that's what happened to Pepe. And initially, all that was fine. It was innocuous. People like Nicki Minaj and, Katy Perry and other kind of, celebs at the time where they were doing it online with him, or I don't mean doing it in that sense, but you know what I mean. They were sort of like posting pictures of him online and that kind of thing. But once you launch a meme out into the world of the internet, you can't control it anymore. And Pepe found his way over to the dark side, and he got appropriated by the alt-right. And he became a kind of what in magic you call a sigil.
Right.
And how this happened is, I say, this is why what's called meme magic. This is the way, this is the technique that the alt-right supposedly used in order to get, Trump into office. And what this means is that the basis of chaos magic is that you don't limit yourself to the traditional operations of magic, which means that you don't worry about having, the right magic circle, and you don't worry about having the proper spells, and you don't worry about getting the name of the demon just right, and you don't worry about all this neurotic kind of preparation that if you do ceremonial magic properly is something you do have to do. There's a lot of work that goes into it. They basically said, screw that, use your imagination, your own initiative, and just use whatever's at hand. Just pick up anything and turn that into a magical implement, a magical weapon, a magical tool in some way. And the way I see it, this is very much along the same lines as what you call found art. Where you're walking down the road, you pick up something that looks strange, you bring it back home, you put it on the mantle shelf, you put a frame around it, and suddenly it's art. It used to be something else, but now it's art. I mean, Andy Warhol's Brillo box or Duchamp's urinal. I mean, the same kind of thing. What chaos magic is doing that, but instead of turning it into art, it's turning it into a magical tool, a magical weapon of some kind. Okay, so chaos magic was kind of first coming up, as far as I can tell, in the late 70s, early 80s. The memes available were old school stuff. Movies, TV, books, magazines, radio, LPs and all that kind of thing. But now what's available, what's at hand, is the internet. And what seems to have happened is the internet has become a kind of exteriorized imagination. Now, there's a notion in the magical tradition of the astral light, and the astral light is this kind of universal medium that encompasses everything, and upon which thoughts, ideas, images, fantasies, they all leave an impression. They're all there. And it's called the Akashic record and other kind of contexts. But basically, there's a kind of universal medium in which our minds, our imagination leaves an imprint. And the magician, the person who practices, the mental disciplines can read this, can perceive this. What seems to have happened is that the internet has become the kind of techno version of that. The internet seems to become a kind of collective consciousness. And what seems to have happened is that people discovered that there are strange coincidences between what was happening on the net and what was happening in real life.
Gary, I need more time with you, man. We're out of time.
Well, let me just close this off. And this is what happened was that people posting stuff on 4chan, this site 4chan, and they were posting stuff about the film Dark Knight Rises. They had a thread called Bane Posting, and what they discovered was that there seemed to be some strange coincidences happening between the opening scene.
Can we do this? Can we do this? Because we're like a hard break, man. Can we do a little commercial break now, and then then you give me another half hour?
Yeah, I'll come back. I can give you another
20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm starting to fade, but
I hear you. Because there's some questions on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, we're with Gary Lachman. Okay, excellent stuff. We're going to do a little half hour there. The book is A Dark Star Rising, Magic and Power in the Age of Trump. Check him out. He's got a thing coming up September 5th. He's going to be talking about Crowley at the Century Club in Soho, London. And his website is, let me see if I can get it this time correctly, is garylachman.co.uk. That's GARLACHMAN. And the books are going to be, I'm going to have all his books in the Opera Report bookstore. We'll be right back after these messages.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Check out cartking.com, 877-986-7771. Have you ever thought about opening your own mobile cart or kiosk business? Perhaps your current business wants to add multiple point-of-sale locations across the country quickly. Maybe the facility you manage could kickstart revenue by adding coffee, food, or retail services, like let's say you own an office building or a warehouse. Put one of these carts there in the lobby. Well, CartKing.com can be the answer to your needs. CartKing.com is a North American designer and manufacturer of the finest mobile retail coffee and food carts and kiosks money can buy. For 20 years, CartKing.com has been working with clients and corporations across America to provide indoor and outdoor carts and kiosks for any application. From large, heated and secure outdoor retail or food kiosks to smaller, more mobile coffee kiosks or coffee stations, coffee carts, CartKing.com designs and builds them all. Carts and kiosks are fun, and so are the dozens of designs on the website, CartKing.com. Please visit today at CartKing.com or just call them at 877-986-7771. Tell them Ed Opperman sent you and you get a good deal. Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You also do all the kind of different services for you. Online dating service investigations called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites, and all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. The Opperman Report is brought to you by SubhashTechnosis.com. Subash Technosis is a search engine optimization and website design company. They're located in India, so you know you're going to save a lot of money and get top quality service. They offer all sorts of business process outsourcing, data entry, banking BPO services, recruitment process outsourcing, software testing, offshoring, research network, customer care, press release, content writing and distribution, and much, much more. Now, you can get a hold of Subash Technosis by email at info@subhashtechnosis.com. Their website is www.subhashtechnosis.com, and their Skype is ANUSHASUBASH. Okay, we're back with Gary Lachman. Check out the website. It is GaryLachman.co.uk, and it's spelled Lachman. Some people might pronounce it Lachman, but it's Lachman he likes.
And that's how they pronounce it in Jersey.
There you go. That's right. Dark Star Rising, Magic and Power in the Age of Trump. Off the air, you were just telling me that you don't practice this.
No, I'm not a practitioner. Many years ago, I was for a brief time, but no, I have a philosophical interest in this. Well, I'm fundamentally interested in consciousness, so I'm insofar as any kind of practices, they're about sort of understanding consciousness. But I don't practice any magic in order to affect changes in the world. But we were talking about that and how the internet was something that was being used
right.
In order to do that. And as I was saying, that people who were posting all this stuff about the Dark Star Rising and Bane and all that, they started to see coincidences. And one of the things was coincidences between the beginning of the film, where Bane is ostensibly being flown to prison, but he's really in charge, and he takes over, and he escapes and sends the plane crashing. And well, perhaps rather morbidly, some of the people that were posting all this kind of stuff, they noticed that there was some strange coincidence between that scene in the film and the tragic Germanwings Flight 9525 crash in the Alps, the French Alps. And one of the coincidences was that the plane crashed near a town called Bane. One of the crash site investigators, his name was Bruce Robin. So, Bane, obviously Bane, name of the town, name of the villain, Bruce Robin. Batman's name is Bruce Wayne. Robin is his sidekick. And also, Bane purposely crashes the plane, and apparently that's what happened with the Germanwings flight as well. One of the pilots crashed it on purpose. And oddly enough, into Trump's presidency, I think soon after, there was another sort of strange coincidence people noticed between Dark Star Rising and him. And there's a scene in the film where Bane has captured Gotham, and he's addressing all of the people, and he says, "I'm giving power back to you, the people." And that's the same thing that Trump had said in some contexts. So again, take that for what it's worth, but there are these kind of echoes going on. And so people started saying, my God, wow, it looks like, we did all this and then that happened. Did we make it happen?
Right.
Okay, that's question number one. Question number two is, well, can we make it happen? That was the next thing. If you do make it happen, then can we? And this whole kind of phenomena got christened synchromysticism. And it's related also to the Slender Man phenomena that happened a bit earlier, where the Slender Man was this kind of craze on the internet, and it bled over tragically into the real world, and with very horrible consequences. And what synchronicicism is basically is when something happening on the net affects the real world, and it's more or less a kind of techno retread of the term synchronicity from the Swiss psychologist C.G. Jung, who was started out as a devotee of Freud, but then later became the second most famous psychologist in the world. And Jung developed this notion of synchronicity. It was basically meaningful coincidence. And it's what happens when something going on in your head, in your life, in some way, you suddenly see something in the outer world that's exactly related to it, not causally, but in terms of meaning. And it's so related that we can't just say it's coincidence. It just seems to be too close, too exact to just be just coincidence. And so if we take that phenomena happening between one's inner world and the outer world, and substitute my own inner world for the internet, that's synchromysticism. As I said before, the internet we can see as this kind of exteriorized imagination. And so that's the theory kind of behind it. And what seems to have happened as the people who, said that they willed Trump into office is that they did this through basically appropriating this character, Pepe the Frog, and as one does in chaos magic, turning it into a magical weapon, and it's known as a sigil. And the sigil is a symbol. It's something that can carry a magical charge of the will and the imagination of the magician who uses it to fulfill his purposes and his intent. And what you saw happening was that people were posting images of Pepe looking over the Mexican border and kind of, thinking about, well, where's the wall? Pepe hanging out with Trump. Pepe became one of the deplorables. This cadre posse around Trump, and Hillary Clinton sort of helped there, and Hillary Clinton helped Pepe because she's the one who sort of brought him to attention, and he basically became this kind of postmodern amphibian swastika because he became kind of the poster boy, the mascot for the alt-right. He turned up in memes of him, turned up on the net of him as Trump, and as president and all that kind of thing. There's even some memes of him as Pepe as Aleister Crowley and all this kind of thing. So the idea was that through the repetitive and constant and determined and focused posting of all this stuff, it would have this effect. It would somehow affect things. It would make things happen. And lo and behold, he's president. Now, I'm not saying that's the only thing that made Trump president. I'm not saying it did make Trump president. What I am saying is that this happened. People did this. And I've met people from the alt-right. I've talked with them, and they've told me, maybe they're having me on, but they told me, we were trying to do this. Everybody, was trying to do this. And the strange thing that happened around Pepe was what became known as the Keck phenomena. And let me just get a little sip of water, and I'll get into that.
Okay. We're here with Gary Lachman from the book is called Dark Star Rising, Magick and Power in the Age of Trump.
Okay. Now, the Keck phenomena, what that is that Pepe is a frog. Okay. And Pepe is a frog who's become a kind of magical implement that's being used in a variant of chaos magic. And while this was happening, one of these people, involved in this kind of thing, they noticed that there's an ancient Egyptian frog-headed deity named Keck, who is the god of chaos. Okay, now that's one part of that. Okay, so Pepe's a frog. Pepe's an instrument of chaos magic. this ancient Egyptian god named Kek, K-E-K, is a god of chaos. So that's strange enough. But make it even stranger. The people who have been, posting everything on 4chan, they had already been using K-E-K. They had been already using Kek as a kind of sign-off. And how that happened was that many of them were fans of the World of Warcraft game. And some strange reason, having something to do, oddly enough, with the Korean language, whenever they wanted to write LOL, because this was online, it's an online game, so they're playing online and they're posting to each other and they're saying all hilarious kinds of things to each other on 4chan. And again, it's all anonymous. You have no name, you're anonymous on it. So in any case, so they're playing this game, posting to each other, but whenever they wanted to say LOL, because something, they got a kick out of something, it came up K-E-K. So no matter what they do, every time they wrote LOL, it came up K-E-K. So they figured, don't fight it. So whenever anything tickled them, they burst out kecking. They would write K-E-K. So these people are already using K-E-K, and they're posting about Pepe, who's a frog. Then they discover that there's an ancient Egyptian frog-headed deity named Kek, spelled K-E-K, who's the god of chaos. Okay, so that's synchronicity number one, let's say. It starts to get stranger in this way. I've said that posting on 4chan was anonymous, but what you did get was an 8-digit number, to kind of sort of note that that's your post. And what started happening was that people posting about Pepe and all this stuff, they started to notice that they started to get double numbers or triple numbers or even quadruple numbers. Each post about Pepe or each post about Trump or something like that. And it's what seemed to be happening is that in some way they felt they were getting some kind of approval. Something was noticing that they were doing this and saying, yes, here, do some more. And they started to bet whether they would get a dub or a trip or something like that. And it started to grow and to grow and to grow, and until this kind of strange thing happening where you have, the whole kind of, there's a kind of, postmodern religion, let's say, a tongue-in-cheek religion rose out of this as kind of, new deity of Kek, Hail Kek. And there's the country of Kekistan and all that. And this became this weird kind of phenomena that mushroomed around that based on all these strange synchronicities. Now, my own experience, I've had enough synchronicities to accept that they're part of reality. They just happen. The world is such that these things take place. I can't explain them. I'm not convinced by anybody's explanation about them, but they're true. They do actually happen. They've happened, as I said, they've happened to me enough times. So I accept it. So I accept the premise that it's not impossible for something to be taking place within my interior world, which we tend to consider to be subjective and limited to, metaphorically, my skull, and the outer world. The standard rational scientific view just denies that this is possible, and it's just completely nuts that you think it is. But I've come to the conclusion that it is the case, and I'm not the only one. Jung he wrote much about it, and many other people behind it. But I think the next step is, okay, can you make it happen? That's the thing. They happen by themselves, and Jung would say, no, you don't make them happen. They happen because the unconscious in some way is trying to guide you towards, becoming more yourself and to individuate and all that kind of thing. So it's a kind of, you're sort of the passive recipient of them, and they're kind of in a way, kind of spiritual guide. But magic is more like, no, screw that. I'm going to make them happen. I want something to happen. I'm going to make it happen. And that's the thing, okay? If you accept the possibility of synchronicities as I do, I can't categorically then deny the possibility that could be the case. You could possibly make things, you could induce synchronicities. And that just strikes me as like, well, that's a good enough definition of magic as any that I know.
And if you're a student of this and you practice it yourself, what made you stop?
Well, it was a long time ago because I gradually became more interested in sort of consciousness itself rather than sort of all the sort of practices around magic. I mean, I was very interested in Crowley, as you noted. I've written a book about him, and I was very interested in Crowley many years ago, back in the late '70s when I was living in Los Angeles, and I had my own band at the time called The No. They were called The No, K-N-O-W, because I was very interested in Gnosticism, and Gnosticism is one of these ancient, philosophies and sort of belief systems that are part of the Western inner tradition. and it's about gnosis, which is a Greek word for knowledge, which is sort of a direct, immediate kind of knowledge of reality, and the kind of altered state of consciousness, sort of mystical experience that many people get into these things in order to have. But I just became more and more interested in sort of dealing with consciousness directly rather than all the kind of rigmarole involved with magical practices, and also quite a few of the people that I came into contact with within the sort of Crowley world struck me as rather dubious at best. And Crowley himself, I got very tired of, and I give my reasons why in the book, and I'll give my reasons why at the talk that I'll be giving next month.
Which is, again, September...
That's September 5th at the Century Club in Soho. It's in London. It's quite an interesting place. I've gave a talk there not too long ago.
Gary Lachman, I can't thank you enough for giving me the extra time, okay? What do you want to leave us? What do you want to? How can people get a hold of you? That kind of stuff. What do you want to plug? Let's put it that way. What do you want to plug, man?
I said my www.garylachman.co.uk. It's my website. You can send me a message there. You can comment on the posts I have. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. That's I'm out there. You can get in touch with me if you like. The book is out now, and it's in good old hard copy, but also Kindle and an audio book that I listened to. And actually, one thing I have to say, I'm quite chuffed, as they say here in London, that I kind of broke into the audiobook market. It was sort of the first one, or one of the first ones. So I'm very happy about that. But and actually, there's I have a YouTube channel, and there's several videos of talks of mine up there. So if you want to check those out, you might want to do that.
Gary Lachman, thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the extra time, and thank you for coming on the show. I'm going to annoy you like hell to come back, okay? And we'll cover these different books whenever we can. Whenever you have more time for me, you have an open door, okay?
No, absolutely. I'll be very happy to.
Thank you so much. Gary Lachman, Dark Star Rising, Magic, and the Power in the Age of Trump. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Good night. Okay, so then we had Gary Lachman, a fascinating guy. I really, really enjoyed this show. Magic and Power, Dark Star Rising, Magic and Power in the Age of Trump. He's got a dozen other books here on his Amazon page here. Lost Knowledge of the Imagination, Aleister Crowley, Magic, Rock and Roll, and the Wickedest Man in the World. We definitely got to have him come back. And I know a lot of the stuff he talks about is way over my head, okay? But I know the audience is way more tuned into what he's talking about and stuff. Even stuff like that. Gary, New York rocker, Blondie, Iggy Pop, and others. I'd love to get him back to come back and talk about some of these other things. A couple of quick notes that I had while he was speaking. One thing is we was talking about all that stuff about Batman. Just blew my mind because at one point I remember, where is this here? At the Iowa State Fair when Trump was running for president, he had this scheme where he was going to take kids on helicopter rides down there at the Iowa State Fair. And they put the kibosh on it, whatever. But ultimately, he was able to give some of these kids helicopter rides on his helicopter. And I remember one of the kids saying, "Hey, are you Batman?" Okay, and you talk about how, like, all the stuff he's talking about, the coincidences, and by the way, too, there was some coincidence, too, in that movie, the Dark Star Rising with Aurora, Colorado, too, in the shooting over there in that movie theater, which was showing the Batman movies, all kind of stuff around that. And what do you call it? So here you got a young, innocent mind whose mind is open to this kind of influence, had the idea popped into his head, "Hey, how are you Batman?" when he saw this stuff and this stuff surrounding Trump, which it goes to show you too, these gullible Trump followers, you know what I mean, who just believe anything he says blindly. I'm right now, as the show is going on, I got some guy back and forth with me on Facebook here about the dossier, the Steele dossier, and it's just so, his mind is just so captured by this kind of brainwashing. It is, And I've had my own experience with this as well, too. I've talked about this. I've seen this with the West Memphis 3 group. That it's, again, that kind of Crowley influence, that kind of black magic going on, where they just the people are able to lie and get away with it and get others to believe their lies, just like Trump is able to do. I had an experience with this too in my own personal life, where I was dealing with a person who wasn't doing outright rituals, but was involved with blood sacrifice and human sacrifice in a hospital setting, just in their own daily practices, and was able to tune into that. See, Trump doesn't actually have to be a student of Crowley or be a student of the occult. He was a student of Norman Vincent Peale. I can guarantee you that. I've seen that. And he is definitely a student of self-hypnosis. I can see that. And also to those salesman techniques, repeat everything 6 times, all that kind of stuff. He's into that. But I suspect, too, I brought up to our guest, Roy Cohen. And, Roy Cohen is suspected to be involved with these dark occult practices with the Process Church of the Final Judgment in there in New York around that same time. And so he could have been more tuned into the dark occult practices. But anyway, that's just my own stuff. I'm nowhere the student that Gary Lachman is on this stuff. I really, really appreciate this guest. I hope we can get him to come back. Excellent, excellent content here. I could just listen to him talk all day long because he's tuned into something here. Dark Star Rising, Magick and the Power of Trump. Gary Lachman, his website is Gary Lachman, which is LACHMAN.co.uk. And don't forget, September 5th, he's going to be talking about Crowley at the Century Club in Soho, London. Thank you so much once again, Gary Lachman. I enjoyed the interview so much that I didn't even, I left out a couple of our commercials. So if you'll enjoy today's show, send a donation, okay, at oppermanreport.com. We would appreciate that. All right, guys, good night.